Hey folks, Sunday night, going back to doing a little bit of a read aloud. Uh, yeah, I had a busy week, so we're gonna have a few pre-recorded streams this coming week, and I'm gonna be able to be in the chat. So we're gonna see how that goes. I know some people have said they appreciate getting a heads up when there's sort of a live stream, but it's not actually live. This is live now, but it'll be pre-recorded so I can send out to the email list. On Tuesday evening, I think around 9 p.m. Eastern Standard, I'm going to stream my visit that I did on Wednesday over to Bell Labs in New Jersey in advance of the merge, the Ethereum merge. And then last week, Jason and Leo and I did a really extensive sort of deep dive into building off of Leo's work on radio ecology and the origins of the environmental movement in the Atomic Energy Commission and what it means for sort of biophysics and energy system modeling, which I think has a whole lot to do with the Internet of Everything that is coming and the impact finance space. So that's going to be split across two different sessions, I think on Wednesday and Thursday midday, but we don't actually have a set time for that. So I've done a couple of read alouds earlier on feed, but I haven't gotten very far. They're not independent ones. I was doing them at the end of a couple of other commentaries that I did, I think last week. But for those who are sort of just tuning in and are not familiar with this book, it's by M.T. Anderson, and it's actually like a young adult novel, and it's from 2002. So yeah, it's already 20 years old, so not super contemporary. But someone had recommended this to me a while back when I was doing my education research, and she was a high school teacher, and she would always have her students read it. And so it's not the most elegant language read aloud because this is high school kids and it's very sort of casual talk. And there's a lot of sections with advertising and things in it. So I'm going to do my best to sort of liven it up. But I think it presents sort of this near future dystopia, which I guess 20 years on is maybe not so far out, and what it's like to be a young person navigating sort of a digital all-encompassing world and what that means. And sort of the heroine of the story is a homeschool girl whose father is a professor of dead languages, which are all these like dead computing languages. So so I'm going to get started on that. I'm just going to a couple highlights. I just finished this book today. So I mentioned it in one of my other read alouds. It's John, I don't know if you pronounce it Fools, The Magus. And it's like a 600-page book. So I feel pretty proud of myself for getting all the way through it. It was quite a good read. And it's a lot about sort of, was written in the mid to late 1960s, updated in the early 70s, about sort of mind games and reality and sort of a ongoing social psychological experiments with various esoteric things and embedded Greek mythology. So I think some insights into this are going to come in handy as I spend the next version. So we had the parametric insurance, then we're going to have the atomic ecologies. And then the next one I'm sort of imagining after atomic ecology is to actually look at these Voronoi systems, these cellular patterning systems, and how they relate to simulation modeling, and also social field theory and psychological theory, going back to Tavistock. I have a lot of aspects of these maps that I've been developing, but Kurt Lewin and Jacob Moreno, and using social simulations and manipulation of social simulations. So this is a pre-digital version, but sorry about that. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here. And ironically, it actually, like one of the characters in this story, the fuddy-duddy woman, her name is Allison, and it's spelled the way I spell my name. So I don't know that I've ever read a novel that actually has my name in it, but that was kind of interesting. And then the other one that I'm picking back up, not as a read aloud, but is very relevant to the site visits that we did in New Jersey at Bell Labs, is this Hugh Everett III, and it's a biography of him. And he was a physicist in Princeton, and he was examining an alternative way of looking at the world, which is the many worlds theory, and this idea of branching off alternate realities, which is sort of very hip in the entertainment media complex lately. And I think it has relevance to the metaverse rollout. So Just a couple other books to keep in mind. So I'm gonna start with Feed, and essentially this opens up. I haven't read too far into it, but it's this group of high school friends, two young men, two young women, and they've gone to the moon to sort of hang out and do high school things. And one of the young men he's gotten caught the attention of a girl, an unusual girl who wears a wool dress in this sort of moon bouncy jumping suit place. And so they're sort of navigating their social relationships, and he's working up his courage to talk to this girl. So, and again, the language is not the most elegant, but I think that the plot is interesting. So it's called The Moon is the House of Boring. She was on the moon all alone. Here it was, spring break, and she was on the moon, where there was all this Meg action, and she was there without friends. And she said she just walked through the crowds and watched, and she saw all these great things that way. She said that she was there to observe. I guess this is useful to think about social simulation, right? There were crowds in the domes at night, spraying Gatorade from hoses, and all these college guys without shirts lifting their arms. And there was a beetle that walked through the lanes and gave out prizes, which seemed really good. But she said that really the prizes, well, they were kind of shitty when you looked at them close up, because sometimes the parts weren't included. She saw pools filled with foam. Her name was Violet. We asked her to come with us. We wanted to go to sleep by then, but we were on the moon, even if it sucked. And it was going to be spring break and, with the action. So there was no way we were admitting that we wanted to go to sleep. And we told her we were thinking about going to some club called the Rumble Spot that we'd heard about on the feed. I don't know, she said. But I was like, you've got to go. You can go and, observe. And Marty said, it will be it will be and he kind of wiggled his hand. Well, since you put it that way, she said, kind of fresh. And Callista laughed. And suddenly I knew Callista was either going to love her or hate her. And after we were walking for a few minutes, it was on the scale, maybe closer to hate, because Marty and Link and I were all walking around Violet and asking her all these questions. And she was asking us stuff, and we were telling her. And I don't think the other girls were really too skip about walking behind us. Link said that he wanted to get cranked before we went. And he said that was there any place we could drink without IDs? And Marty said that he knew of one place. It was called Sombrero Dot. And he went there before with his cousin. He said it wasn't too out of the way. And so we got there, and it had been torn down. They had built up a pretty nice stucco mall there. So Loga and Quendy said that they could go in and buy some cool stuff to go out in. And that seemed good to us. I wanted to buy some things, but I didn't know what they were. And after we walked around for a while, everything seemed kind of sad and boring. So we couldn't tell anymore what we wanted. Our feeds tried to help. And as we were walking around, we were getting all the prices of things. But really, the only thing I wanted to get was a pair of infrared knee bands so that I could get better ones off the feed and have them sent to my house than in the stupid physical moon stores. And Quendy bought some shoes, but the minute she walked out of the store, she didn't like them anymore. And Marty couldn't think of anything he wanted, so he ordered this really null shirt. And he said it was so null, it was like ordering nothing. And now it was even later, and we wanted to go to the club, but we hadn't gotten drunk yet. So Link said, well, maybe we could take a cab to the hotel and break into the minibar. And as we were driving through the tube streets, there was all of this commotion because of the protests about the moon. There were all these kids, my dad calls them Euro trash, and they were standing in the middle of the square and broadcasting to everyone all these slogans. And it was hard not to receive because they were so angry. But the cab drove right by them, and they didn't stop us. They were protesting all these things. Some of them were even protesting the feed. They were shouting, chip in my head, I'm better off dead. Chip in my head, better off dead. And Loga rolled her eyes and was like, oh my God. Now we got back to the hotel, and kids were running down the halls with their fake birds. The fake birds were still in style, and it was stupid because the birds didn't even fly or sing or anything. And we went to the girls' bedroom and started to assault the mini bar. I wanted to break it open quickly because Violet was looking like she wasn't having fun. She was sitting all stiff on the bed. Just a sec, I said, and she nodded, but it was kind of polite. And Callista was whispering to Link, what's her problem? We tried the mini bar first with a comb and then with kicking, and we threw it against the wall, which wasn't as hard to do with almost no gravity. You broke off a thing, Marty said. You broke off a thing. A caster, I said. A caster, said Link, pointing at my nose. Good one. You know your break sucks when the most brag part of the night is you coming up with the word caster. And Violet was just sitting on the bed playing with her thumb, and her shoulders were droopy, and her feet were turned in. And in fact, all the girls looked kind of on suspend, and Callista and Loga were staring into space, watching something on the feed. Fox, said Link, kicking the minibar. I'm going to get weasel-faced. There is no way you're getting weasel-faced, I said. Let's just go. And Marty was like, well, we could malfunction. Oh, God, said Loga and Quendy, rolling their eyes. And Violet looked really uncomfortable now. It was pretty obvious she really didn't want to be with us. And Link looked around at the girls' faces. What's the problem? He said. Drop it, Link, I said. We're not going in Mal. Well, I heard about this great site called Low Bremer. $85, one click, and we'll be completely raked in 1 hour and a half. We won't know which way is up. That's big scrambled for cheap. Unit, said Marty. We're there. Link said, okay, let's drop it, units. I said, no one wants to be fuging. Am I no one? Said Link. Callista was like, are you asking in terms of sex appeal? Ow, Marty said. And Link said, shut up, Marty. And Callista chatted up all us guys. Don't push this, especially because this girl is Meg uninto it. And Link was like, low bremer. Do those words mean nothing to you? Break, Link. Break and upgrade. And there was no way he was getting lobotomized or weasel-faced. So we just went over to the rumble spot unslammed. And it was their youth in action night. So we could get in. And it was Meg, big, loud. And there was everything there. There was about 1 million people, it seemed, and lights, and the beat was rocking the moon. And there was a band hung by their arms and their legs from the ceiling. And there were girders and floating units going up and down, and these Meg Youch latex ripple chicks dancing on the bar. And there were all these frat guys that were wearing these, I don't know, they were brag. They were wearing these tacky-on shorts, so you could barely look at them, which were $789.99 according to the feed. And they were on sale for like $699 and could be shipped to the hotel for an additional $78.95. And that was just the great thing people were wearing. And when I looked around, I wanted so much that all the prices were coming into my brain. It was like bam, 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 like fugue joy. And Loga and Quendy and Callista were already out on the dance floor. And my feed was like going things about dance and pictures. And they were feed flinging across the dance floor of people on fire doing the moves. And Violet was screaming to me. I could hear a thing. She was like, da, 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 da. And I was like, what? And she chatted at me. This is a scene. I was like, don't you dance? Not really. Are these all college kids? Well, I bet most of them. I mean, look at the guy in there, the neck bat, bow tie. He was maybe 100 or so dancing with the ripple chicks, a man in a dirty old tweed jacket. He had this long white hair that looked kind of yellow, and his eyes were wide, like he was in Mal, but I'm not sure he was in Mal. And he kept on sticking his thumbs up in the air. And then they turned off the artificial gravity, and we all went bounding accidentally. And it was like people cruising past each other with their necks kinked. And Violet grabbed onto my arm. And now I was thinking that even though she looked really uncomfortable, like she was watching some kind of bugs in an experiment, and it wasn't so bad being a bug as long as she grabbed onto my arm. And so I said, don't worry, we'll drift down. Sorry, she chatted. No wrong, I said. Really, I didn't mean to grab you. No wrong. I put my hand on her arm, and then she smiled and took her hand out from under my hand. And by that time, we'd come down again, and we were bending our knees. The guy with the tweed jacket had on a jet belt, and he was flying around near the ceiling. You don't look like you're having fun, I chatted to her. I will. When? Well, I'm not used to this. Well, what do you do for fun? When? Normally. Well, I haven't been on the moon before. I mean, anywhere. I mean, what do you do? And the man with the bow tie was standing near us. He was trying to talk to Link by cranking Link's head around and shouting in his ear, and Link was backing away. Are you having a good time? She asked. The moon isn't really working out, I said. Next time, maybe you should try Mars. Yeah, I've been to Mars, I said, but it was dumb. And suddenly she laughed. Are you serious? Yeah, I'm serious. Oh my God, Mars is a whole planet. And it's dumb. She was like, dumb? She was starting to piss me off. I said, yeah, dumb. The whole world? Dumb. The whole world? Dumb. Oh, this is golden. The red planet was a piece of shit. Well, I don't believe you could, but I couldn't receive her anymore of the chat because our feeds were spiking. And the music was getting louder with the band singing, and I saw her folding her arms like she didn't like me, and I didn't like her, and everything was pulsing, even the old guy, and everyone was hopping, and they were scattering feeding pictures across the floor, tribal dances, stuff with gourds, salsa, houses under breaking dams, women grinning, women oiling men with their fingertips, women taking out their teeth, girls' stomachs, boys' calves, rockets from old quote unquote movies flaring, bikini tops, fingers creeping into nostrils, silos, suns, and the old man was standing by our side and trying to yell, but we couldn't hear him. And so he leaned closer and he said to us, to Marty and Violet, and now Link and me, he yelled more, like he yelled, "We enter a time of calamity." And we stared. We enter a time of calamity. We enter a time of calamity. And he tried to back up all of us except Violet, who was confused. And Link was saying, this unit, he's like completely fuging. He has this, we enter a time of calamity. We enter a time of calamity. And the old man reached out with a metal handle and touched me on the neck. And suddenly I could feel myself broadcasting. I mean, I was broadcasting across the scatter feed, going helplessly. We enter a time of calamity. We enter a time of calamity. And I couldn't stop. And now I could feel that it was coming from other places too, other people he had touched. And Marty was trying to say that he'd never had this before. And it was kind of cool, but he couldn't because his signal was jammed just with that over and over again. All of us in a chorus going, we enter a time of calamity. We enter a time of calamity. And people were turning toward us. People were looking. We were standing in a line and the old guy was standing in front of us and people were moving away. The police were coming and I could see them. I couldn't really move much. And I felt kind of kicking in my face. And I discovered it was my mouth, which was saying the time of calamity thing. But at the top of my lungs, we were shouting, we were broadcasting. And then all over us, as the cops came through the crowd, the guy started this crazy calling, both out loud and on the feed, this crazy calling over it all, over our chorus. And it went, we enter a time of calamity, blood on the tarmac, fingers in the juicer, towers of air frozen in the lunar wastes, models dead on the runways with their legs facing backward, children with smiles that can't be undone, children shall rot in the aisles, see the pillars fall. And while we said again and again, we enter a time of calamity, and others in the room said it too, and Violet looked as scared as me, and I tried to take her hand, and she tried to take mine, and the police were by our side, hitting the man over the head again and again with stunners and sticks, and he fell on one knee, and finally my fingers found her wrist, Violet's, and it felt so soft, like something I'd never felt before. It felt like the neck of a swan in the wind. And then the police were at our sides, whispering to us, we're going to have to shut you off now. We're going to have to shut you off now. And then they touched us, and bodies fell, and then there was nothing else. So this is part 2, Eden, awake. The first thing I felt was no credit. I tried to touch my credit, but there was nothing there. I felt like I was in a little room. My body, I was in a bed on top of my arm, which was asleep, but I didn't know where. I couldn't find the lunar GPS to tell me. Someone had left a message in my head, which I found and then kept finding everywhere I went, which said that there was no transmission signal and that I was currently disconnected from the feed net. I tried to chat Link and then Marty, but nothing. There was no transmission signal. I was currently disconnected from the feed net, of course, and I was starting to get scared, so I tried to chat my parents. I even tried to chat them on Earth, but there was no transmission, etc. I was currently, etc. And so I opened my eyes. College try. Nothing, she said. I had gotten up and was sitting on a chair beside her, and we were in the hospital, and we took up a ward. Link was still asleep, and nurses went by. I said, I can't see anything through the feed. No? She said, or through my hospital gown, so stop trying. And I smiled. I thought I may be. Sure you did. You want some apple juice? We'd been up for 15 or 20 minutes. Everything in my head was quiet. It was fucked. What do we do? She asked. I didn't know. Boring. There was nothing there but the walls, and we looked at them and at each other. We looked really squelch, our hair and stuff. I mean, we had these remote relays attached to us to watch our blood and our brains. And there were 5 walls because the room was irregular. One of them had a picture of a boat on it. The boat was on a pond or maybe a lake. I couldn't find anything interesting about that picture at all. There was nothing about that was about to happen or had just happened. I couldn't figure out even the littlest reason to paint a picture like that. Still boring. Our parents had been notified while we were asleep. Only Loga hadn't been touched by the hacker. She hadn't let him touch her because he looked really creepy to her, and so she stood far away. There were also others, people we'd never met, who had been touched, and they were in the wards too. He had touched 13 people in all. There was a police officer there, waiting in a chair. He told us that we would be offline for a while until they could see what had been done and to check for viruses and decrypt the feed history or to get information to use against the guy in court. They said that they identified him and that he's a hacker and a naysayer of the worst kind. We were frightened, and we kept touching our heads. Suddenly, our heads felt really empty. At least in the hospital, they had better gravity than at the hotel. Missing the feed. I missed the feed. I don't know when they first had feeds, like maybe 50 or 100 years ago. I mean, before that, they had to use their hands and their eyes. I mean, computers were all outside the body. And they carried them around outside of them in their hands, like if you carried your lungs in a briefcase and opened it to breathe. People were really excited when they first came out with feeds. It was all like, da-da-da-da-da, this big educational thing, da-da-da-da-da, your child will have the advantage, encyclopedias at their fingertips, closer than their fingertips, etc. That's one of the great things about the feed, that you can be super smart without even working. Everyone is super smart now. You can look things up, automatic, like science and history. Like if you want to know which battles of the Civil War George Washington fought in and shit. Super smart. It's more now. It's not so much about the educational stuff, but more regarding the fact that everything that goes on the feed. All of the feed casts and the instant news, that's on there. So there's all that entertainment. I was missing without a feed. Like the girls were all missing their favorite feed cast, this show called Oh, Wow, Thing, which had all the kids like us who do the stuff, but they get all pouty, which is what the girls go crazy for, the poutiness. But the biggest thing about the feed, the thing that made it really big, is that it knows everything you want and hope for. And sometimes before you even know what those things are. And it can tell you how to get them and help you make buying decisions that are hard. Everything we think and feel is taken in by the corporations, mainly by the data ones like FeedLink and OnFeed and American Feedware. And they make a special profile, one that's keyed just to you. And then they give it to their branch companies, or other companies buy them, and they can get to know what it is we need. So all you have to do is want something, and there's a chance that it will be yours. Of course, everyone is like, da 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 da, evil corporations. Oh, they're so bad. And we all say that, and we all know they control everything. I mean, it's not great because who knows what evil shit they're up to, but everyone feels like that. But there's the only one way to get all this stuff, and it's no good getting pissy about it because you're still going to have to control everything, whether you like it or not. Plus, they keep everyone in the world employed, so it's not like we could do without them. It's really great to know everything about everything whenever we want, to have it just like in our brain, just sitting there. In fact, the thing that made me pissy was when they couldn't help me at all. So I was just lying there and I couldn't play any of the games on the feed. I couldn't chat anyone. I couldn't do a fucking thing except look at the stupid boat painting, which was even worse because now that there was no one on the boat, which was even more stupid. And it was kind of how I felt, that the sails were up and the matter and the rudder was, well, whatever rudders are, but there was nobody on board to look at the horizon. Cash and carry. I had a few pages cached from right before the feed stopped, and I flipped through them sadly. I went back and forth between them. One was a message from the crazy asshole, which says, "You have been hacked by the coalition of pity." And the other was the good sale at Weatherby and Crotch, which by this time I had probably missed. It was too bad because I would have liked to have been able to take the opportunity to check out those great bargains. For example, they had a trim shirt with side pockets that I probably would have bought, except it only came in sand, persimmon, and vetch. Night and boring. It was Saturday night. The main lights were out. It had been a day since any of us had heard from the feed. Our parents were probably already on the moon and were coming to the hospital the next morning. And for most of the day since we woke up after the attack, we had stared at the walls. We'd been sitting on our beds and we tapped our feet on the rails. None of us could get the tune of "I'll sex you in" out of our heads. Someone kept starting it up, and then the others would swear and tell them to shut up. And then we couldn't help ourselves, and we start to tap it out on our trays with a spork. Link had finally woken up, and he paced up and down the floor. Loga came by during the afternoon, and she talked to all of us, and she kept saying, "Oh, oh," in this sorry tone of voice, which was nice, except that she would then pause, and we could tell that she was chatting all the news back to our friends on Earth. Occasionally, she'd forget. Would say out loud to no one, "Oh my God, yeah, right here," or "hello," or whatever she was saying in her head. And she would laugh at jokes we couldn't hear. Once she went to the bathroom casual-like and came back with her hair parted in a different place. Callista and Quendi watched her. Later, without saying anything, they went and did theirs different like that too. Marty was sometimes saying his usual kind of thing, which is like, "Fuck this shit, fuck this," and he wanted to be out playing basketball or something. There was nothing to do. Violet stared at her hands in her lap, and I looked over at her. I smiled, supportive. And she looked at me and then went back to staring at her hands. Now it was night, and all the big lights were out, and we were lying there. There were machines that were taking our pulse and shit, and we were supposed to be sleeping. I heard Violet walk across the floor and head for the bathroom, and a few minutes later, I heard her walking back. "Hey," I said. "Yeah, hey," she said, and she stopped. "You can," I said, and I pulled myself up against the pillows. "Why don't you sit down for a sec?" So she sat down in the chair by my bed, and I could see the curve of her nose against my pulse, which was green and bumpy. We sat there for a little while, and I was thinking, this is nice. Just sitting here. We don't have to say anything. I felt real contented. I lay my head back on my pillow, and I looked over at her face. I could see the light from the heartbeat on her tears. I said, you're crying." "Yeah," she said. "You don't, well, I don't know how to say what I wanted. I tried. You don't seem like a crier." "No," she said, and we sat, and now the silence wasn't very good. Her head was low, and I could see the curve of her cheek against my brain waves, which were red and loopy. She said, "You go try to have fun like a normal person with a real life, just for one night. You just want to live, and then suddenly you're screwed." "You're not screwed." "I'm screwed." We sat there, and I wanted to say something to cheer her up. I had a feeling that cheering her up might be a lot of work. And I was thinking that sometimes trying to say the right thing to people, like, it's kind of like brain surgery, and you have to tweak exactly the right part of the lobe. Except with talking, it's more like brain surgery with old rusty skewers and things, like maybe those things that you use to eat lobster, but brown. And you have to get exactly the right place, and you're touching around in the brain, but the patient keeps jumping and saying, "Ow, ow." And thinking of it like this, I started to not want to say anything. I kept thinking of nice things I could say, like, "I'm glad you went out with us last night because that's how I met you." Or, "And I think you are a normal person." But they all just seemed just smarm. So we just sat there together, and we didn't say anything. And it wasn't bad. And I hoped that she could see my smile in the light of my brain. Father. When my father got there the next morning, he didn't stay long. He was being very powerful and businesslike. He was dressed up, and he looked like he was ready to give some orders and sort things out. He looked like everyone around was stupid, and he was going to roll up his sleeves and do some clarity work. He stood there staring at me for a few seconds, and I was like, "What? What?" He seemed surprised, and then he blinked, and he said, "Oh, shit, yeah, I forgot. No chat. Okay, so just talking." I was like, "Do you have to remind me? What's doing? How's smell factor? Your brother has a name. How's mom?" She's like, "Whoa, she's so stressed out. This is dude." He said, "Dude, this is some way bad shit." And I could completely feel Violet watching us. She was listening, and I didn't want her to have her judge us and thinking we were too boring or stupid or something. And my father asked me to tell him what had happened, and I told him, leaving out some parts, like trying to break into the minibar. And he just kept shaking his head and going, "Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Shit. Yeah." And finally he stood up and I could tell he was pissed. And he held his hands up and he said, "They want to subpoena your memories. This is the thing," which is, okay, this is bullshit. And after a minute, he said to someone who wasn't there, "Okay, okay." And he turned to me and said, "I'm going to go down to the police." "Dad," I said, "when am I going home?" Dad put his hand over his ear. "Okay," he said. His mouth twitched and he nodded to someone. He hit me on the knee and left. I was staring at the wall and the stupid boat picture, and I heard Quendy say to Violet, "When are your parents coming?" She said in a flat voice, "They're busy." "Yeah, with jobs. I guess they can't come at all." Salad days with Sneeze Guard. The next morning, we hadn't heard anything, and we decided we needed to be cheered up big time. So Marty invented this game where he blew hypodermic needle tips through tubing at a skinless anatomy man on the wall. And we spat the needles and we tried to pin his nads. And it was the beginning of a great day, one of the greatest days of my life. We all played the dart game and we laughed and we sang, "I'll sex you in." And everyone was smiling. And it was Skip. And the surprise was Violet was the best at the dart game. She always won and I sucked. She tried to teach me. It was a complete turn on. She took my hand and put the tube in my mouth and she whispered, "Aspirate with the tongue." People were really impressed. Link and Marty were completely hitting on Violet for it. But she didn't pay them any attention. And sometimes she would stand there with one hand on my shoulder. And I could feel that she was putting pressure on it, that she didn't need to stand with all her weight because I was there. And then Loga came into the hospital for a while and we were all talking to her about the stuff. She stopped for a second because the girls' favorite feedcast, "Oh, wow" thing was on. And they were all like, "Tell us what's happening. Tell us what's happening." And so we all gathered around in our little gowns. And she sat there cross-legged on the bed and told us, "Okay, so now like Greg's walking in and he's like, oh my God, he's completely malfunctioning. He's completely in the mouth. And Steph is crying on the sofa." Okay, so she goes, and then she told us the story of what was happening as it happened. And we all sat there smiling. And I never heard Logan tell a story this good before. And she even used her hands and stuff. And her eyes were vacant, like she was seeing some other world, which I guess she was. Jackie is sitting up in the front of the boat. And he holds his hands up. And he's going, oh my God. He goes, "Organelle, I always loved you from when we first went sailing." And Quendy was like, "Oh God, this is so romantic." "Oh, Meg, big Meg, you can feel the breeze on your skin. It is warm like those nights, when we we're always going to be young. This breeze is like that. I wish you could feel it." And we all shivered. And she said, "You can smell the salt. And the moon is out. It is high above everything and soft." And Quendy actually cried one tear. And Violet and I looked at each other and we didn't look away. We were like looking into each other's eyes and all when the doctor came in and was like, "What the hell happened in the examination room? What's with all the needles?" And he was upgrading to homicidal and going all da-da-da-da-da, professional care unit, da-da-da-da-da, dangerous and costly to infection, da-da-da-da-da. And luckily Link's mom heard him yelling at us and she's a complete dragon. So she gave him a piece of her mind. And she told him we were all suffering from a very stressful experience and we weren't used to having these kinds of stresses and that he had to understand that we had to have our fun too. And I still felt kind of bad about it because we made a big mess. And Violet was completely Meg blushing. But at least we didn't get like shoved into orbit on cyber gurneys or something. I liked being just a few beds away from her. We could wave. We all talked about old music like from when we were little and all the stupid bands we had back then and the stupid fashions we liked in middle school. Like the year when the big fashion from LA and the ship that everyone wanted to dress like they were an elderly convalescent home. There was this weird nostalgic chic for that. So we all remembered having stretch pants and velour tops. And Callista even had bought one of those stupid accessory walkers at Weatherby and Crotch. And there were those stupid ads for having your pants pulled up like around your chest. And Violet said she still had a cane at home. When we were eating dinner, sitting on her bed side by side, she said to me, "This is fun." "It weirdly is," I said. "Maybe these are our salad days." "Huh?" Happy. What's happy about a salad?" She shrugged. "Ranch," she said. The garden. Violet was off someplace talking to the doctor. I say someplace because we were using the examination room to blow needles at Anatomical Guy's basket. Link and Callista were standing real close by the vibrating bath, and I realized they had probably decided to hook up. It looked like Callista was getting over Link being so stupid, which was brag because he's a nice guy. And Quendy sat there at the table glaring at them. Violet came back from the doctor. She was all intense looking, and I asked what was wrong. She said she'd found a place she wanted to show me, and I said, sure. And I went with her, and we went out into the hall, and then shouting from the examination room was more distant. We walked for a ways through some tubes and on, and people floated by automatically on gurneys. And she walked in front of me, and her slippers went fatik, fatik, fatik on the floor. And they were soft sounds like the sounds mouths make when they open and close. And I watched her from behind. And when we stopped to wait for an up tube, she lifted her ankle so that her heel came out of the slipper. And with her toes, she slid it back in, back and forth on the tiles without thinking about it. She massaged the floor. And when the up tube was free, she settled her foot back in and walked fatik, fatik, sliss, fatik, right on in. And she took me up to a huge window, and we stood in front of it. And outside the window, there had been a garden, like, well, I guess you could call it a courtyard or a terrarium. But a long time ago, the glass ceiling over the terrarium had cracked. And so everything was dead. And there was moon dust all over everything out there. And everything was gray. And also something was leaking air and heat in the garden, lots of waste air, and the air was rocketing off into space through the hole. So all the dead vines in the garden were standing straight up, slapping back and forth, pulled towards the crack in the ceiling where we could see the stars. Whoa, I said. Isn't it beautiful? It's like, I said, it's like squid in love with the sky. She was only looking at me, which was nice. I hadn't felt anything like that for a long time. And she rubbed my head and she went, "You're the only one of them that uses that uses metaphor." And she was staring at me and I was staring at her, and I moved towards her and we kissed, and the vines beat against each other out in the gray dead garden, and they were all writhing against the spine of the Milky Way on its edge. And for the first time, I felt her spine too, each knuckle of it, with my fingers, while the air leaked and the plants whacked each other near the silent stars. Dead language. We were watching Marty invent a game called Struggle of the Dying Warrior. It involved him being tied with all of his limbs, like his arms and legs, onto the frame of the bed with the rubber tubing. And then he tried to get up and walk. He was not getting very far. Violet and I were sitting on a bunk, swinging our legs in rhythm. We were talking about our families. I told her that I had a little brother, and she said she said I hadn't mentioned him, and I said he was a lot younger and a real pain. Violet asked me about my mom and dad, and I told her that my dad did some kind of banking thing, and my mom was in design. I didn't understand what my dad did exactly, but whatever it was, he was off doing it on the moon until tomorrow, which is when they were going to tell us about our feeds. And when I asked her what her dad did, she said he's a college professor. He teaches dead languages. People study that? She shrugged. I guess. Okay, so what are the dead languages? Well, they're languages that were once important, but that nobody uses anymore. They haven't been used for a long time, except by historians. Like what languages? You know, Fortran, Basic. Well, what does one sound like? And she slid off the bunk and went to get her bag, and she opened it and pulled out something which was a pen, and she also had paper. And I looked at her funny. You write with a pen? Sure, she said, a little embarrassed. And she wrote something down. She put a pad of paper on my lap, and she asked, "Do you know how to read?" I nodded. I can read a little. I mean, I kind of protested it in school, trademark, on the grounds that silent E is stupid. Okay, well, this language is called Basic, she said. On the paper, it said, oh gosh, these letters are little. 002110, go to a 013300. 1013500 peak, 16388, comma, space 236. 013310 poke, 16389, comma, 236. Looks kind of like that. She read it to me, and I could tell the numbers fine. So what does that mean? I ask. Well, it's the first thing my dad teaches the students on the first day. It means I came, I saw, I conquered. I looked at her pen. You write all the time, I said, completely in awe. Well, I've done it since I was little. I mean, do you write stuff? Well, not stories or anything. I just write down things I see sometimes. On paper? Yeah. I looked at her. You're one funny enchilada, I said. And she nodded, real quiet. Doesn't your hand get all cramped up? I ask. I mean, don't you end up like hook hand? And I made a hook hand and she made a hook hand and we pawed at each other with the hook hands. She shook her head and smiled. I asked, well, why don't you use the feed? It's way faster. I'm pretentious. Really pretentious. Yeah, so the studio audience had noticed, but seriously? Seriously? Suddenly, something occurred to me, and I looked up at her. Marty had fallen to his knees, and he was being pulled back towards the bed by the tubing. His cheeks were puffing out. His hands were in fists. His fingers were getting blue, and all the ridges on his arms stood out. Callista and Link were whistling with their fingers in their mouths, and the other people in the ward were yelling, shut up, would you all shut up? And I asked Violet, your father, he's a college professor, but he was too busy to come see you after you were like completely collapsed from a hacker attack? Too busy? She looked me in the eye. No, she said, but that's what I told you. Release. The salad days couldn't last forever. We really wanted to get back to Earth. Everyone wanted to forget how sucky the moon had been. Tuesday, just before lunch, a doctor came and a policewoman and a technician. Our parents were all talking over in the corner. The rest of us were sitting around talking about spaceship disasters. The technician called us all to attention and went through this whole thing. He was sorry for the delay, but they wanted to be absolutely sure there was no permanent hack, that our feeds were safe, et cetera, et cetera. He was all like, da, da, da. Must have been a difficult time for all of us. Da, 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 da. We would find our normal service resumed without interruption. Da, 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 da. He was Meg sorry. We had to go through this. And he had complied with the police and handed over our data. Da, 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 da. Like to thank you all again for your patience. And one by one, we went into the examination room. And in there were nurses and the doctor and the technician. And the nurses were watching the relays and our blood pressure and all. And they were like, don't worry about anything. You'll feel it all coming back in a few seconds. And the doctor touched a boot stick to our heads. He said, okay, could we get like a reading on this limbic activity? And the boot stick was cold on my neck. And I could feel the little hairs standing up around it. There was some kind of static electricity. And they moved the boot stick a little. I heard it beep. You should feel it now, said one of the nurses. But I didn't feel anything. I looked around and they were watching me closely. No, I said, shifting on the bed. I didn't feel anything, nothing. I don't feel anything. Oh, hold your head still, said the doctor. He shifted the boot stick and it beeped again. And I kicked my heels against the bed. Nothing. There's nothing. Well, why don't you pulse up, rising, limbic activity, okay? He's just nervous. Don't worry, it'll hit him in like a second. Well, we have readings on engram formation. Signal engaged. Don't drop the exterior relays yet. Ford Laputa, Sky and Suburb Monthly says there's no other up car like it, and we agree. See, there you go, said the nurse. You'll be more than a little attracted to its powerful T-44 Fermion lift and vertical rise of 50 feet per second. And if you like comfort, quality, and class, the supple upholstery and ergonomically designed dash will... And they slapped me on the back. I laughed, and the doctor and I did these big grins, and I went back out into the other room, and we were all starting to feel it now. We were all starting to feel it good. Name is Terry Punk, and I'd like to tell you about an upper body strength. And then the feed was pouring in on us now, all of it, all of the feed net, and we could feel all of our favorites. And there were our files and our M-chat lines, and it came on us like water. It came on like frigging spring rains, and we were dancing in it. Celebrate fun. Celebrate friends. You've just come through something difficult, and this time for a table full of love and friendship and the exciting entrees you can find only at... We were dancing in it like rain, and we couldn't stop laughing, and we were running our hands across our bodies, feeling them again. And I saw Violet almost hysterical with laughter, rubbing her cheeks and pulling her hands down across her breasts, her chin up in the air. Big bro, you there. Mama says I should... Until one crazy day when this cranky old woman and the sick little boy meet a coy dog with a heart of gold, and they all learn an important lesson about love. The New York Times called it, hits a grounder to the mound. In other news, protests continue today against the American annexation of the moon. Several South American countries, including Brazil and Argentina, have submitted requests to join the global alliance in response. President Trump spoke from the White House What we have today with the things that are happening in today's society is, and she held my hand and we found each other's hand through the waterfall. And if you liked I'll Sex You In, you'll love these other popular schlump rock epics by Hot Storm and Chunder band Beefquake, full of riffs that we handpicked our spring fashions, and holding hands, we danced. Hardgore, the best fed sim battle game ever to rip the horizon, 60 levels of detonation and viscera just waiting to fly at your command. Captain Bastard, if you don't feel slogging waist deep within 15 seconds, we'll eat our hats. In your absence, you may not have heard. Hand in hand, we danced. Part 3, Utopia. Normal. Things were back to normal real quick. We went back to Earth and we all rested up, and our moms brought us ginger ale in bed, and we chatted all the time on our feeds, and we shared music and shit. We had this major debate going on because we watched the oh wow thing, and there was this part where Organelle asked Jackie whether she had Meg hips, and he was like, well, since you ask, we both could work out more. And she was like, you shithead, you should have lied. And so all the guys were saying, no way, if she asked him this complete question, he should answer it. And the girls were like, if you ever insult how I look, then you're completely shallow. And we were like, but she asked. And they were like, oh my God, you don't get it. And Link said, well, if you really don't want to know how they look, then how come they ask so much? And then I said this thing, and Callista said this thing, and it was like da 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 all day. And it was kind of fun. And it was like the debates where you argue about different points of view. My family, while they were coming and going, I saw them on the landings, or sometimes I went down to the kitchen behind the counters. My dad didn't really talk to me except to walk up and check to see if I had a fever, which I didn't because it was a software problem. And my mother was always holding onto my brother's smell factor, like squeezing him like a doll. She was really busy with him. And she went to Pee Wee Little League games with him and even took him to work with her sometimes when she wasn't around in the afternoon. He sat in the closet watching Top Quark with it broadcasting all over the place. So I watched it too because, well, there's nothing else to do really but watch Top Quark and eat chipwiches. Captain Top Quark, the whole planet is so sad that I think they'll need to do a whole lot of good thoughts and hugging. That's why lickety split, and we're on our way. Charm Quark, prepare friend cannon. Bosun, turn our biggest orange's sails around to Cryos on the planet Sadala. Aye, aye, sir, you've made me one happy particle, sir. And Smell Factor had one of those birds now, too. One of the ones that didn't fly or sing, the metal ones. So I could tell they were really Meg yesterday. I mean, stuff always starts with people who are cool and in college, and then it works its way down. And when the 6-year-olds get it, it's like, who cares? The birds must have been yesterday for a while because I didn't see them in any ads. And even Smell Factor was leaving his around and not clutching it. A few days later, I went on errands because really there was no problem anymore. It felt good to get out and see all the up cars and tubes, and in the parking lots, just normal stuff like people walking and talking on their feeds and kids hanging out and shit. And they were all in the suburbs, stacked on top of each other like Applecrest and Fox Hollow. And I would just fly through the tubes in the suburbs in my parents' up car, looking at all the houses and the lawns, each one with its own pod and everything. And it was all neat. And then I'd go home and sit on my bed and watch the feed, and everything seemed normal. It's times like this that I'm real glad I have friends. I mean, they say friends are worth your weight in gold. We had a party at the end of the week over at Quendy's because her parents were off choking somewhere. That was when everyone was having those choking parties. I mean, it was a complete midlife crisis. It was the first time I saw Violet since we were on the moon. It was brag. Because, well, she didn't have a ride and I could borrow my parents' up car, so I got to fly over and pick her up. I met her at a mall near her house. The mall was right on the surface, and you could see the sky through the dome. She was waiting there, and she looked up at the sun hitting one of the department stores. Violet lived in a suburb that was a few hundred miles away from my suburb, so while we drove, we had a little time to talk before we got to the party. And it was great because we had music on our feeds, and it was the same music. And so I knew that she was hearing the same notes that I was hearing. And our heads were like moving together. And she was putting her hand near the lift lever so that when I got to the exit tube and we went to lift us, her hand was there and our fingers closed over the lift lever. And we lifted it together and we were flung together up into the sky. And we were going along pretty fast and we were going around towers and shit. And she asked me, what will a party be like? Like a party. Well, I haven't been to so many. I shrugged. Well, you do this. I mean, I don't know. It's fun. It's like a party. I mean, what do you do instead of parties? Well, my friends and I are all homeschooled, so we're kind of a mixed bag. Bettina's mother has us come over and we weave ponchos. You don't go to school, trademark. It's got like a trademark thing on the school. There, the school trademark. Alf's parents teach us how to breech load their anti-aircraft gun. Whoa, can you show me? Well, here's the surprising thing. It's all in the wrist. Unit. Yeah, unit. God, I'm so excited to be going to a real party. Yeah? Well, will it be like it is on the feed? Well, I patted her hand. Yeah, I mean, dumber, but yeah. Well, why? This makes me feel like a special girl, the specialist girl in the world. And she raised up her hand and we knocked knuckles together. She leaned back in her seat and she pulled some seatbelt out and let it roll in. We were both thoughtful for a minute. There were some weather blimps in front of us. They were all yellow in the sunset that was spreading over the clouds, trademark. And we flew between them. We could barely see the silver of their blimp hides through the color of syrup. They were like a herd. She asked, do you think things are going to be different? From what? From the way they were before? And I looked at her and she looked serious and suddenly I shrugged. Well, it's good to have people again, like all these people talking to you in your head. Well, we've all been through this big thing together, she said. It's got to change us somehow. And she rested her arm along the back of my seat and I leaned my head back and I could feel my hairs rub against her arm. Even to my hairs, her arm felt soft. Undervalued truffle. We got to the party. It was a pretty good party, but low key. And when we got there for a second, we stood in the entryway because Link and Marty were playing each other at this game. The cranky tumble of Dark House was one of the favorites with zombies and mutants. And they were all spinning around and shooting their fingers like guns. They couldn't see anything, just game feed. So when Violet walked in, Marty almost whacked her in the stomach with his fist. He and Link were swearing and hopping up and down on the marble tile. Unit, said Link, just get on my way. And Marty was like, out of the way. And we're like, oh shit, we're up. Unit. And he was shouting at Link, who was like missing some shot at the spine bleach. And we went into the living room and over to the table where Quendy had all the drinks and beer. And people were sitting around drinking, and some of them had music on their feed and were sitting around talking to it. And some others had imported a feed cast of Snowblind, a comedy about a young man who nothing ever happens to until one crazy day he crosses the mob at a ski resort and finds out who's really buried in the moguls. And then all hell breaks loose. NC-17. Violet looked kind of timid now that we were there. And she took a deep breath and went over to say hi to Callista. I looked around and talked with Quendy for a few minutes. Quendy was at first really nice and normal, talking about how it was good to see that we were doing okay, and how she was okay and everything was fine. And then she started glaring at Callista, and she was chatting me like, do you think Callista and Link are doing it? And I shrugged, and I was like, oh, I bet. He's such a pig. He did it with me like, oh, never mind. And Quendy glared at Callista and popped a popcorn shrimp in her mouth from way down below with her thumb. And she was like, I'm kind of tired of just being the friendly one that everyone steps all over. Yeah, I chatted. How do you do that with the shrimp on your thumb? Okay, I'll show you. Hey, are you going out with Violet? Yeah, that's great. I think she's Meg nice. Yeah? Callista says she's kind of stuck up, but I don't agree at all. Like, Callista's the one who's stuck up. Callista said that? Yeah, I mean, you want to try the shrimp thing on your finger? And she showed me how to pop the shrimp. And as she did it, I looked across the room and saw Violet talking to Callista. And both of them were frowning. And I was worried that something bad had happened. And so I chatted her, hey, beautiful, what's doing? Hey, handsome, just talking with Callista, having a nice little chat. I made the mistake of saying we were back to the picayune grind. And now she keeps saying, picayune, picayune, and pretending I'm French. And I wish I hadn't said anything. And I looked around and everyone was nodding their heads to music or had their eyes just blank with the feed cast. It was just a party. I mean, nothing but a party. And from one direction, I heard a kid say, I think the truffle is like completely undervalued. And from the other direction, a girl was saying, but he never pukes when he chug-a-lugs. And it was like nothing had happened. And we were watching feedcasts as if our brains had never been invaded by the asshole. And Loga was laughing with her front teeth showing as if she'd never been different from the rest of us. The one left with the feed when the rest of us didn't have it. And some guy was pouring the beer, and Link and Marty were doing acrobatics in the entryway, fighting invisible demons. And everything was completely normal. and the truffle was completely undervalued. And this is like the advertising, which the president denied in an early address on Tuesday. It's not the will of the American people, the people of this great nation, to believe that the allegations that were made by these corporate watch organizations, which are not the majority of the American people, I repeat, not, and aren't its will. It is our duty as Americans and as a nation dedicated to freedom and free commerce to stand behind our fellow Americans and not cast things at them. Stones, for example, the first stone. By this, I mean we shouldn't think that there are any truths to the rumor that lesions are the result of any activity of the American industry. Of course, they are not the result of any American industry, anything the American industry has done. The people of the United States know, as I know, that this is just plain hooey. We need to remember that America is the nation of freedom, and that freedom, my friends, freedom does not lesions make. And the president is expected to veto the congressional ... The others in Mal. The party went on. I couldn't concentrate anymore. We watched Snowblind. The guy in it, well, he fell off a platform of a mob-owned ski lift and landed in the powder next to a sexy assassin with a heart of gold. It was a strange feeling sitting next to Violet, and she wasn't laughing, which was weirding me out. She was just sitting there. The feedcast went on, and they all went up the mountain on skis and shot at each other. And finally, they all leaned over, learned an important lesson about love, and then it was over. I went upstairs to take a whiz, and Marty and Link were dragging me into a bedroom. Unit, you are about to walk through the mirror. It's time, Marty said, for a bulb tweaker. Oh, Unit. I was like, is this a malfunction? Hey, this is a great sight. It's smooth as glass. Bulb tweaker? It's just a mild scrambler. I can completely see straight, said Marty. He pointed out, it's right in front of me. And there were other guys up there too, and one girl, and they were whispering. Someone had gone completely fugue on the bed. Do a burst and then crank it to a slow burn. Okay, it's going to go again. Unit, said Link, punching me on the arm. Fly the friendly skies. I was like, not tonight. Come on, Unit. I don't think Violet's into the Mal. Oh, come on, Unit. She'll never know. What is this, shitheads? Cut the ABC's after-school special. She'll never know, said Link. I said, what did we just go through, Unit? I whipped myself on the back of the head. Remember? Like, did we just, never mind. What? I said, never mind. Okay, said Link, your loss. Here I go. You with, Marty? I'm with. And they spread out their arms and closed their eyes, and you could see when it hit them. They got the shutter first, and then their heads rocked, and there was a big stumbling, and they went backwards, and there were all the people back there on the bed and the chair and the floor, blinded, doing the quiver. And Link's tongue came out. It was purple from candy. And I went out into the bathroom, and when I was done, I went back downstairs, and Quendy and Violet were talking. And Quendy was like, where is everyone? But I didn't tell her they were up getting scrambled in the master bedroom. Violet asked if I wanted to walk out in the yard for a minute, and I said, sure. So we went out, and we were standing on the porch, and it was much cooler out there. The dome on the yard's pod was all blue, like it was night, which it was, and I mean up on the surface, but it was blue there at the house too. And we stood leaning on the railing, and the night was perfect. And we shut out the music from the feed. It was funny then to look back in and see the people moving to nothing. And she said, you're quiet. And I nodded. What's doing? She asked. No real one thing. And we just stood there together. And I said, you didn't like the feature? And she said, well, it was okay. You didn't laugh? Well, I like the mountains and the pine trees. I mean, I'd like to go to the mountains. Wouldn't it be nice? With a fire? I pictured the mountains and the fire and a snowball fight and let's get out of these wet clothes. And I said, yeah, sure. I want to get to the country, she said. And she looked at me. What's really doing? I couldn't tell her about the guys going in Mal, and I didn't want her looking at them when they were on the wall-to-wall carpeting and doing the quiver. And I didn't want her to look at them as if she was sorry. And finally I said, people have just gone so quick back to like it was before. Why? She said, what happened? I didn't tell her about the upstairs. I just told her about sitting in the living room and hearing the guy who was like, the truffle is undervalued. And the girl who was like, he never pukes when he chug-a-lugs. And I told her about them. And then I looked for the memory of them, which I still had. And I played it for her. And she knew exactly what I was talking about. She went brittle. I feel like we're the only two of us who like remember the thing. People want to forget. You can't blame them. And she looked at me and she didn't say anything for a second. And then she said, "My feed wear is damaged." "What? In your brain?" She put her hand next to her scalp. "It'll be fine, but I'm the only one that had damage. They're trying to fix it." "What's wrong? I mean, can you still get stuff, like get stuff and shit?" And she laughed. "Yeah, both of them. I'm fine. But they say I'll have to find some way to make adjustments. Something happened when the guy hacked. I mean, most people that the hack, they just jam them for a while. But somehow it affected mine more. Something's still wrong." Holy shit. Do you remember one day when we were on the moon and the doctors took me out alone and then I came back and they took you out to the air loss garden? The doctors, they were talking to me about this. They said it would probably stabilize, but it hasn't. They said it will probably be fine. Holy shit. Well, she patted me on the chest. "Calm," she said. "The rose will bloom ere long." Yeah, what fucking ever. And she watched me and I stared at her. I thought about Marty and Link going in Mal and she chatted, "What are you thinking about?" "Nothing." "Well, it can't be nothing." And I thought about Link and Marty's eyes rolled back and I lied, like I'm just wondering whether he meant Truffles, the mushroom, or Truffles, the candy. And she laughed and touched my face. And I felt like I was protecting her from something. And that felt good, like I was a man already. And I hugged her like a man and we kissed. And for a long time, we stared at each other. I liked the way the synthetic breeze was on her hair. And we stood looking out at the shrubs and the motorboat up on the trailer. And I felt like I was in love. And our arms were around each other. And she leaned close to my head and took a handful of my hair in her hand and pulled my head down. And she whispered, "Keep thinking. You can hear our brains rattling inside us like littler Russian dolls." Nudging. That night, the night after the party, I had something that I thought was a dream with me at a great site with all the games were free and you could play anything. And so I was thinking different, even about the pretty dumb games like Turbo Checkers. Because if you can get anything for free, I mean, what the hell? So I started with one of those, which was a fantasy game. And I was putting on some elf gloves and stringing my bow when I could feel that someone was nudging my feed. They were like nudging it with their cheek or their nose. In my dream, I asked them who they were. And in my dream, they told me that they were the police. And they asked if I were a victim of the hack at the Rumble Spot. In my dream, I said yes. And in my dream, they told me, "Okay, go back to sleep." And in my dream, I said, "Who are you really?" And they said that they were going to be running some tests on me and that I should think about something else. I said that they weren't the police, so who were they? And they said, "Well, here's the lizard you have always been wanting. We took the liberty of giving it a nice new collar." And I asked if all these games were mine. "All is yours," they said. "All yours. Good night, sweetie. They're all yours. Take them. All yours." And in my dream, I thought they were the hacker group, the coalition of pity. But when I woke up, I didn't remember for weeks. And what I remembered was just the games, which once I was awake, I couldn't find, and the elf gloves and the bow and the lizard that was all mine. America, a portrait in geezers. I remember as the last forest fell, at about that time, we could see hawks and eagles in the cities, and people walked outside more back then, and the temperature usually didn't get above 100, and there were streets in the cities, and the eagles flew over them, wobbling without moving their wings. I remember seeing the hawks perched on street lamps during those last days of the American forests. They had come from the mountains, maybe, or the pine woods that were now 2 or 3 levels of suburb. But the hawks sat in our cities like kings, and they would not look down from their lampposts as thousands of down cars went by the underneath. It was like they sat alone on the Douglas firs. I miss that time. The cities back then, just after the forest died, were full of wonders, and you would stumble upon them, these princes of the air, on common rooftops, the rivers that burst through the city streets so they ran like canals, the rabbits in parking garages, the deer foaling, nestled in dumpsters like a nativity. Lose the chemise. It was maybe it was like 2 days after the party with, quote, "never pukes when chug-a-lugs," that Violet chatted me first thing in the morning and said she was working on a brand new project. And I asked her what was the old project, and she was like, did I want to see the new one? And I said, okay, should I come over to Sukasa? I've never been there. And she was like, no, not yet. Let's meet at the mall. And I was like, okay, sure, fine, whatever swings your string. And she was all, baby cakes, you swing my string, which is a nice thing for someone to say to you, especially before you use mouthwash. And so I flew over to the mall near her house through the rain, which was coming down outside in this really hard way. And everyone had all their lights on until they got above the clouds. Up here, it was sunny and people were flying very businesslike. The mall was really busy and there was a lot of crowds there. They were buying all this stuff like the inflatable houses for their kids and the dog massagers and the tooth extensions that people were wearing. You know, the white ones that you slid over your real teeth. They made your teeth look just like the big single tooth going all the way across. And Violet was standing near the fountain and she had a real low shirt on to show off her lesion because the stars of oh wow thing had started to get lesions. So now people were thinking better about lesions, and lesions even look kind of cool. And Violet looked great in her low shirt. And besides that, she was smiling and really excited for her idea. For a second, we said hello and just laughed about all the stupid things people were buying. And then Violet, she pointed out regarding legs to stand on. I didn't have very much of one because I was wheeling around in a wheelbarrow full of a giant hot cross bun from Bun in a Barrow. And I said, yum, yum, yum. And she was like, you ready? I asked her what the idea was. And she said, look around. And I did. It was a mall. And she said, listen to me. And I listened. And she said, so I was sitting at the feed doctor's a few days ago, and I started to think about things. Okay, so everything we do gets thrown into a big calculation. This is the twin part. Like they're watching us right now. They can tell us where you're looking, and they want to know what you want. It's a mall, I said. Okay, so they're going to make you want things. Everything we've grown up with, the stories on the feed, the games, all of that, it's all streamlining our personalities so that we're easier to sell to. And I divide everyone up into a few personality types. And then you get ads based on what you're supposedly like. And they try to figure you out, who you are, and make you conform to one of their types for easy marketing. It's like a spiral. They keep making everything more basic so it will appeal to everyone. And gradually, everyone gets used to everything being basic. So we get less and less varied as people, more and more simple. And so the corporations make everything simpler, and it goes on and on. And this was the kind of thing people talked about a lot. Like parents were going on and on about how toys were stupid now when they used to be good, and how everything on the feed had its price. And okay, that might be true, but it's also boring. So it was like, yeah, okay, that's the feed. So what? So this is my project. She smiled and put her fingers inside the collar of my shirt. So listen, she said, what I've been doing over the feed for the last 2 days is trying to create a customer profile that's so screwed that no one can market to it. Now, I'm not going to let them catalog me. I'm going to become invisible. I stared at her for a minute, and she ran her finger along the edge of my collar so her nail touched the skin of my throat. I waited for an explanation, and she didn't tell me anymore. But she said to come with her, and she grabbed one of the nodules of my shirt. It was on one of those nodule shirts, and she led me towards Bebrecker and Carl. And we went into the store, and our feeds were all completely Bebrecker and Carl. And we were hammered with all this crazy high-tech fun stuff they sold there. And then a guy walked up to us and said, could he help us? And I said, I don't know. But Violet was like, sure. Do you have those big searchlights? I mean, the really, really strong ones? And he said, yeah. Well, Well, let's look at those. And he went over to some rack and he took these big searchlights off the rack and he showed us some different models. And the feed had specs and they showed us the feeds while he talked. And when he went back to get another cheaper searchlight, I said to Violet, what's next? She whispered, complicating and resisting. Bebrecker and Carl were bannering us big. It was like, we've streamlined the Tesla coil for personal use. You can even wear it in your hair with these new da-da-da and relax, yawn, and slump while our greased cyber massage beads travel up and down your back, guaranteed to make you, etc., like that. And I was like, okay, huh? But the guy came back and had another searchlight, and he told us, you can see shit real good with this one. And I have one of these on my up car. It's sometimes like, whoa, really, whoa. And there was this one time, and I was flying along the ground, and I shined the light down on the ground to look at the tops of the suburb pods. And all over the top of them, it looked like it was moving, like black goo. So I turned up the brightness and I went down and I shined it more bright. And then I turned out the black moving goo was all these hordes of cockroaches. There were miles of them running all over the tops of the domes, and they kept trying to get out of the light. So wherever you shined it, there would be this. I'd like to mount the light on my belly, Violet said. Would that be possible? He looked at her funny. With the swivel head? Sure, then I could swivel it. Well, what is this for? Well, something special, she said in this low voice, and she rubbed her arms up and down sexily. And he was like, well, I can't even think. And he gave me the thumbs up, and she winked at me, and it was kind of a turn on. And she got him to send her all of the feed stats for the lamp, but then she didn't buy it, and she didn't have it mounted. Instead, she thanked him a real lot, and then she took me out of the store. And I was starting to get the picture and think it was all pretty funny. So we kept going from place to place asking for weird shit that we didn't buy. And she took me to a rug store and a store with old chests and pieces of 8 and shit. And then we went to a toy store and she asked them to explain the world of Bleakazoid action figures, which is a dumbass name if I ever heard one. But they explained it all. And it was mainly that they were these muscular people from a parallel world, which is usually how it is. And we didn't buy anything. And then we ran through the big hallway with her tapping her head and saying, hear that? The music? It was pop songs. They have charts that show which chords are most thumbs up. Music is marketing. They have lists of key changes that get 13-year-old girls screaming. There's no difference between a song and an advertising jingle anymore. Songs are their own jingles. Step lively over here. And we went to a clothing store and she held up all these stupid dresses. And the girl was like, I'm helping a weird kid, so I'm going to be really fake. So she kept smiling really fake and nodding really serious. Like all the dresses, and Violet held up and she was all, well, that looks great. And Violet said, I don't know, do you think? He's pretty wide in the chest. And the girl looked at me and I was frozen. So I said, yeah, I work out. And Violet said, what are you? What's your cup size? And I shrugged and played along. Like mine, like 9.5, I guess. That's my shoe size. And Violet said, I think he's something like a slinky kind of silky. And I said, well, as long as you can stop me from rubbing myself up against a wall like that the whole time. Okay, said Violet, holding her hands up like she was annoyed. Okay, the chemise last week was a mistake. And I practically started to laugh snot into my hand. And we went to some more clothing stores. And we looked at all these dumb sweaters and pretended we liked them. And then we looked at a makeup that she wouldn't wear and a gravel tumbler. And we went to a DVS pharmacy superstore and she comparison shopped for home endoscopy kits. And we were looking at the endoscopy kits when she started whispering to me, for the last 2 days, okay, I have been earmarking all of this different stuff as if I want to buy it, you know, like a penny whistle, a barrel of institutional lard, some really cheesy boy pop, a sarong, an industrial lawnmower, all of this info on male pattern baldness and business stationery, barrettes. And I've been looking up the house painting for the Antarctic homeowner and the way people get married in Tonga and genealogy homepages in the Czech Republic. And I don't know, it's all out there waiting. And I picked up one box. This is the cheapest. You swallow the pills and they take the pictures as they go down. She said, well, once you start looking at all this stuff, all of their sites, you realize this obscure stuff isn't obscure at all. I mean, each thing is like a whole world. I can't tell you. How's your and I pointed to her head. How's your feedwear working out? It's fine. You're not listening. I'm just wondering. She asked me, well, what do you think? Well, I like the guy at Brebecker and Carl. I mean, I wonder if it's true about the cockroaches. What do you think about resisting? She asked really loudly. Her jaw muscles were sticking out. I said, it sounds great as long as I get to wear the chemise. And she laughed. And when we went to dinner at J.P. Barnigan's family extravaganza, we had mozzarella sticks and then a big steak. And she got a Caesar salad. And then there were free refills on drinks. And afterwards, we were sitting in the booth. And I asked her whether she wanted a ride home. She said no. And I said she was sure. And she said, yeah. I said, what are you doing with your parents? Well, what do you mean? I mean, well, with your house. And why you have me meet you here instead? And why didn't your dad come to the moon? I mean, when we were there, you know? And she looked at me funny and she said, do you know how much it costs to fly someone to the moon? I guessed. A lot? Yeah, a lot. I mean, he wanted to come, but it would have been like a month of his salary. And he saved up for a year to send me. And then I went and then all that stuff happened. He saved up for a year for you to go to the moon? Yeah. She said, "Hey, here's what you can do. You can drop me at the feed technician's office. I have an appointment." Made out for a minute in the car, and then I flew her a few miles away to a technician, and I left her there. And before I pulled out of the tube by his office, I looked back at her standing by the door. She had her hands on her elbows, and she was pinching the elbow skin and pulling it. She was waiting there, pinching and pulling, and then she went in. All right, so I think that's probably what I'll do it for tonight. These don't even have chapters. They're all these little parts, so I guess sniffling will be next for the next time. I'll mark the page. Anyway, thanks for hanging out.